Okay, we'll come to order. The purpose of this session is interview of candidates for Planning and Zoning Commission. We've got a total of 6 candidates to interview. Each interview session will be 20 minutes once we start. Jeremy Goldstein is our first interviewee. And let me just describe the format for a second. Jeremy, if you'd like to take 2, maybe 3 minutes to provide an overview, count on us having read the written answers to questions and all that you had provided. It's best if the balance is really focused on Q&A that we'll have. And once Jeremy finishes his statement, guys, we'll just go to questions and answers in no particular order. Whoever has a burning question, please hold your hand up and we'll go from there. So we'll start the clock running. May, we'll just make sure we all know when we got 3 minutes to go so that we know that the end is coming. Jeremy, take it away. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's quite a different scene than the last time I was here. The room was filled. I also thought I had a pulled hamstring, but it was actually a herniated disc. I didn't know it at the time, so I was in a lot of pain the first time around. I don't have much to say. I'm currently the chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission. You have been so for 3 years. I've enjoyed it quite a bit, learned a lot, and feel free to ask questions.
Great. Question?
I'll go first, if you don't mind. Are we doing a round robin, or
just whoever's got an urge? Jan.
Okay. Jeremy, first of all, thanks for your service. It's been good. I can't help but feel close to planning and zoning, having been there. So I watch what goes on. I think you do a great job. One of the concerns I have right now is the downtown master plan, as you know, elevated your level of review to the final say on level 2 projects in the downtown area, and level 2 is a pretty large project. What's your feelings on that? How's it working?
Level 2 review is quite frustrating, particularly for the public, because it's a technical review only, and I go out of my way to, before each meeting, go through the agenda and find out where we have latitude and where we don't. So when we're in the public meeting, to let everyone know that we can only consider the technical aspects of it. And I don't know if we're the ones that are best served to do that. So you create the situation where people get up and they're very passionate about their neighborhood and what's going on, and they have issues that may not relate at all to the technical aspects of it. And it's a quasi-ministerial review, and it just doesn't seem, the ability to publicly speak out about it, but then have it mean nothing, has ended quite a few meetings or agenda items with a lot of angry people. It may be best to have that go back to the technical review committee, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up on that?
Please.
Sure. So did I hear you saying that because the public's input, which may be subjective, on level 2 reviews, and P&Z can only look at the technical aspects of it, tell me again, where were you recommending level 2 then go to?
So my understanding is it used to be with the technical review committee. There was no public comment for it. Yeah. So, I mean, I like the idea of having the public comment. It's just I don't know how to, it doesn't end well if there's not a technical reason. And it's difficult when you get to this meeting. For instance, they'll get notice and say, well, we just got notice 10 days ago, and we don't have enough time to get our own technical expert to get up to speed on this project to deal with it. We would have liked to have been included in the process earlier on, and maybe be invited to the technical review committee and have some more advanced notice. So if it did stay with us, perhaps maybe it's a change of process to make it more fair.
Councilman Smith.
If I could, I just want to clarify what we're talking about here. There's level 2 technical review, but Jan was referring to those level 2 projects through the downtown master plan where it goes beyond technical review.
Okay.
So I understand there's 2 level 2s.
Understood.
Two terms where one term to describe 2 things.
Right.
And I think Jan's and Chris's question was going, well, I don't know if yours was, Chris.
Sorry, now, so I understand your distinction.
I apologize for that being confusing, but my real concern was with the downtown portion of that.
So what is your concern then again?
The concern, Chris, pardon me for interfering. My concern is the level of review, final level of review occurring at the Downtown Commission for really large projects, 12 stories or
Right.
less, that you have the final say in that.
I mean, I think that's a positive to sort of to depoliticize approval. If they meet the requirements, I don't see that as a problem being in planning and zoning.
My concern, overarching concern, is something you need to think about, excuse this time, it's creating everything being 12 stories or less in the downtown.
Huh.
But go ahead, I did not
mean,
mean to change the...
Yeah, sorry to hijack, Chris.
I mean, we've got a 25-story height limit in certain areas, 145 feet in the mid-level height zone, which is about 12 stories. So I don't know if that is necessarily the driver. It may just because my personal frustration with clients is I want them to build higher where they're allowed to. And usually it gets into construction type and cost or fear of...
Fear of having to come here.
Sorry?
Fear
Well,
of-
no, not only that, no, but fear of demand. They don't want to overbuild and, you know, they're worried. But, sorry.
Sorry.
Chris,
Yeah, so I was talking about the level 2, for instance, the one you just addressed in the Kenilworth.
Yes.
That was not at a scale to come to city council.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was 14 units are going, a single family. So it came to you and planning and zoning, and my understanding from what you're telling me is you can only look at the technical aspects of it and see if it's in compliance with that.
Correct.
But as we heard that night, there's a lot of concern about just, urban forest being lost, about, the road being narrowed to comply. And tell me, should planning and zoning have some more flexibility on how they look at projects like this? Because, again, it doesn't come to council, and I think many in the community that left that night felt frustrated that the aesthetic concerns, some of the other concerns that are not clearly design standards were not adequately, responded to.
I don't think there should be arbitrary flexibility. So if there are areas that are not addressed in terms of there needs to be an aesthetic review or whatnot, that can be added. But I do think it's important to have, these are the rules, these are the guidelines, and if you meet these, then you can, develop. I mean, they complained, there was concern about loss of an urban forest, but it was, Ms. Matthews correctly stated, it's someone else's land. And if they wanted as a neighborhood to preserve that for the neighborhood, then they could have tried to purchase that, which I think that's making the rounds right now. But, it's frustrating, but a lot of these homes that are there now were someone else's green space before they were built. And I understand if you have a large parcel in a neighborhood that people use, and once it gets developed, you feel like you've lost something.
Right.
But
Can I ask one more question?
Please.
Okay. In your response here, you talked about a decision by planning and zoning that you disagreed with was the Caledonia Road rezoning.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit from your perspective on why you feel like that was the wrong direction to take?
yeah, I get very concerned with about property rights and arbitrarily or changing the zoning on someone's property without their involvement with it. I think there was effort to try to contact that property owner unsuccessfully, but he did send representation to the meeting that spoke for quite his full 10 minutes and made it very clear that they weren't in favor of it, but would be in favor of something in between. And so for me, that works both ways. Whether I liked what could have been done or not, I just feel like we need to be very careful with people's properties' values.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when does it hit a threshold? There was concerns about the slope and the level of development that would have been possible on that slope with the previous rezoning, and there are a lot of concern from the surrounding neighborhood. I mean,
Let's try to answer briefly so we can.
Okay.
Sure. For me, I think, to build there, you'd have to go get proper engineering. I mean, I'm relying that in order to build, you have to go by the building code and get it, do it appropriately. I didn't necessarily like people coming up and using county maps and saying, well, this is non-technical or expert testimony that really was being considered for decision-making. For me, didn't really carry a lot of weight. My assumption is it won't get built if it doesn't meet the requirements.
Sure.
Soil stability and such.
Okay, I don't mean to really focus on a particular issue, but because it's current, it's a good example, I think. You said that you think having clear rules that people have to adhere to is the best way to make decisions. And yet, on that recent Kenilworth decision, a variance was granted to make roads narrower than we allow. When do you decide to break the rules?
For me,
Yeah.
in that particular case, I asked staff, is this road deviation commonplace or unique? And they said it's very commonplace. There's very many roads in the city of Asheville that are that width, and that deviation was a standard practice to grant. If they had said, well, no, this is something that we don't normally do, then I would have had an issue with it. And so yeah, that was because I wanted to make sure that it met the technical requirements. Otherwise, I couldn't have supported it.
Question here. Jeremy, this council pretty broadly is interested in increased density that would promote affordability and help build our tax base, and more compact living in urban places is gaining popularity across the U.S. That would, there's a lot of discussion about updating the comprehensive plan and perhaps adapting the Unified Development Ordinance. Could you comment on particularly a potential move toward greater density and more compact development?
I mean, I'm very much in favor of it. I would love to participate and support anything that would encourage that, particularly in the downtown.
And I'm sure you've been on the commission for a while, so you might anticipate pushback from certain neighborhoods, certain areas of town to that sort of move.
I mean, yes. I mean, one of my frustrations has been back when I first got appointed, we had this, was it a sustainability bonus? If it was within a certain distance of a corridor and met these criteria, you can get larger density. So those are typically areas that aren't currently urban or underdeveloped, and you get a lot of pushback, understandably, from the neighborhoods. But I've also, in my experience, have seen these maps of the city grow over time, and it changes, and it does get more dense, and it needs to grow. I mean, the rules have changed. In order for us to grow, we have to create more density, increase the tax base.
Maggie, how are we doing on time? Are we?
Eight more minutes.
I have a question, Mark.
Okay, great. 8 minutes. We've got 8 minutes to go.
Following along with what Mark was talking about around density, when perhaps that Kenilworth project kind of dovetails into this, the current cottage development guidelines that we have, it seems that they aren't really fitting any of the builders' needs. We don't have quite what we need for folks to show up and do that smaller footprint development with the higher density single-family units, or maybe there's some duplexes or however it's set up. But if you could just speak for a moment about how we can get to a better place on cottage development, perhaps being able to allow for some of these tiny homes to be sited, smaller lot sizes, just how we might technically approach getting that density.
You're saying it's not being built, or what can we do to encourage that? Or?
Correct.
I mean, I think the reality, I'm thinking of the Lodestone subdivision. They're down on Harrisonville Highway. I call it Lodestone, next to where the McDonald's used to be. Originally, that was planned and approved, I believe, by council for more of a lot of footprints. And it wasn't economically feasible. There was, you've got, 50 roofs, and it comes down to economics oftentimes. So ultimately what got approved, there's, 5 buildings, 5 footprints, 5 roofs. It's just better economy of scale. I mean, I don't know how I could see that happening in smaller developments, in the larger and maybe further out.
More, away from those corridors?
Yeah. In the city, in the urban area, you want to build just denser, higher up. But, I mean, ultimately, that could lead to better affordable housing opportunities if you build smaller footprints. I don't know how you would, code-wise, encourage that.
Thanks.
Mayor Gwen, I want to make sure we're, okay. Cecil's got
Yeah,
one.
another question is, it seems like P&Z has principally been ruling on projects, and part of the name is planning. Do you think that there's a way that P&Z could contribute more to the planning process in the city?
I mean, that's a great question. I always feel like we serve at, your direction. Right now, it's a little difficult that we don't have a full-time planning director, so we have spent some time to try to identify areas where we view as hotspots that keep coming back. And it becomes a matter of resources and a matter of where you want us to spend our time. I view our first and foremost priority as a review body. And we do have other duties and powers, per se, but I certainly don't want them to conflict with what your priorities are, because that's paramount. If you decide, hey, we're going to make these 3 innovation districts and we want to spend some time on theirs, how can we take staff time and money to do something else without your direction?
And just to comment on that point, we're aiming for a joint meeting between the council and the Planning and Zoning Commission to have the discussion you point to, the need for clarity as to direction and goals for the commission.
Well, and that, just to expand a little further on that point, it is a volunteer body. I'm the guy that hears from the other commissioners when we have an agenda like we had and someone said I spent 4 days, 5 hours a day reading the material and I haven't even had a chance to go to all the properties. So it's their resources too. We want to make sure we have a functioning, enthusiastic, dedicated commission as well.
Well, and so could you, I know we have this joint meeting coming up and that is an exciting opportunity, and I wonder if you have any hopes or expectations about ground we might cover as between the two bodies at that upcoming meeting.
I mean, my simple request would be to sort of sit down and give us guidance as to, all right, these are your responsibilities, duties, powers. These are your priorities, because there is some people on the commission that want to spend more time planning, but you get to a point where, are we planners or are we lay, volunteer people from the community? I don't know if we should become a planning board. We don't have the staff or the resources to do that. But again, like I said, so I view our time and effort and resources as, we need to really take your direction. If you want us to kind of go down the list of what our duties, responsibilities are, I'd love to hear from you guys what we shouldn't be doing, and then we can follow up and respond.
More questions?
I have one. In your opinion, why did the East Chestnut developer pull out, and how could we have improved that process?
I think he pulled out because there was a threat of a lawsuit, which I don't like, because you also don't want to be held hostage as a city or a developer to lawsuits. That's my, if people feel like, well, geez, we'll just file a lawsuit, how are we going to get anything done? Because any group, you have lots of different people and different perspectives. But I think that's a perfect example of one of those, it meets everything that in my opinion, aesthetically it did not, people were not pleased with the architecture at all. But that's why I think they pulled out. They were fearful that it would just continue and get held up, and it doesn't do anybody any good.
And how do you feel that process could be improved?
I don't know how. I don't know how to improve that. Okay. If there was they were asking for a number of variances, so I guess it could be improved if we alter the code to allow, if it's within these distances, revisit that issue of, hey, we can't annex anymore, we really need to encourage dense development near transit areas and public transportation and give a bonus for affordable housing. I guess relax the standards of setbacks and things like that to make it easier to do that.
Do you think that our UDO fall short in terms of clarity on these kind of things. We do a lot of conditional zonings, and do you think there's room to have more things go through that we find acceptable anyhow under a use by right sort of paradigm that might come from a better code?
Yeah, and UDO is pretty difficult to navigate.
The document perhaps
Yeah.
should be simplified, you might
Correct.
say. Okay.
Is that going to buzz? I don't know that needs.
I'll stop it.
Okay.
It's less than a minute.
We're in the last minute, so there's time for one more quick question if we've got it.
I just want to say quickly, thank you for taking the time to do this and going through this process again, since you're already serving, and I appreciate your service thus
Yep.
far.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christie's next, I think, Maggie? Yes, then we have a little break.
Yeah.
Oh, light breaks.
1 minute. Ends at 14. Is somebody like you out there? Christy Carter, welcome. Thank you for being here with us, and thank you for your service to date on the Planning and Zoning Commission. You've provided us, written answers to our questions, and just so you'll know the format, 20-minute block here to do this. Like for it to focus more on Q&A from us.
Okay.
Count on us having read what you wrote, but go ahead and take a couple minutes if you'd like to offer any kind of quick overview or emphasize any thoughts you've got about how P&Z is going and why you should be appointed again. And then we'll just rotate to Q&A, and Maggie will give us a 3-minute warning, and I'll keep my eye on the clock as
Okay.
well.
Okay. In terms of how P&Z is, I think the reason I'm standing here applying again and how P&Z, how it's going, those two, the answers are intertwined, and I'll get less nervous as I start talking, so bear with me for a second.
Doing great.
So I think that as my answers to the questions reflect, I think we're somewhat at a transition point where we had the comprehensive plan, we were on a path, the economy tanked, we're climbing out of that, and as you know, we're having developments picking up. There are more and more cases coming before us, and they've been very interesting, is the way that I'll say it, over the last probably the last 6 months or so, where we've had some cases, particularly around multifamily development, where we need that, but there's not an affordable housing component to those. I'm thinking of one in particular that I'm not sure has come before you all, the one out on Sardis Road, where it's a multifamily project, was on industrial land, a bunch of different things like that.
We're very involved in that one.
Yeah, not a fun one. But different things like that are coming up, and I think more so than my first couple of years, these things that are just different and unique. Chestnut Street may fall into that. The Sunset Parkway falls into that. And I like those. I think they're hard. They challenge me. I think they challenge the whole board. And I think that I would like the opportunity to stay on P&Z to figure out how we as a city respond to some of those. I think I called them oddballs in my application, for lack of a better word, but how do we deal with those oddball properties that are out there? And that I think as we see more and more infill development, those are often more contentious, and I think we're just going to see more of those, and I feel like I have something to offer in those conversations.
Great. Well, we'll open to Q&A time.
Okay. You want me to start again?
Go ahead. Dan. You beat
My
Cecil by a
burning-
millisecond.
My burning question.
Cecil will be next.
First of all, thanks so much for your service. And one of the things that's a concern to me, with the downtown master plan, it enabled planning and zoning to be the final voice when it comes to approval or disapproval of a level 2 project, which have gotten quite large. And I'd like to know your thinking and your feel of what that does. Is it a good or a bad thing, and how so?
I think I was pretty clear about that in my application, about they're good and bad. I think, let me answer that in two ways. With the downtown master plan, I think it's more okay. What I've seen since the downtown master plan has kind of been, as it's being implemented, we've seen projects where people kind of know what's expected very clearly, and things have happened. The developers may not say that things have been easier, but when by the time they get to us, it's had so much review through the downtown commission. Again, there are clear standards. Those cases seem to be a little easier to me when they are under the downtown, in the downtown area. And I'm thinking of the hotel over by Battery Park, the hotel where the BB&T parking lot is currently. Those weren't contentious for us. So that, I think, maybe is okay. Outside those level 2s, where we have trouble, or where I have trouble, is with the community. They sometimes don't understand that it's a level 2 review and it's based on technical standards. So folks want to come up and say, I don't like this, I'm uncomfortable with this, this is in my backyard, and it's a technical review, and if I can't say, here's the technical, at least this is how we've been instructed, if I can't say and point to the technical standards to say no to that, then I feel like I have to say yes to that. A good example from the last meeting was the Kenilworth property, where we really did struggle with that one, and ended up voting for it because it was a subdivision. I'm sorry, that's a subdivision modification, not a level 2. So scrap that. But in general, it's just that neighborhood tension and not clear understanding. And as I said in my application, if they really don't have a voice, then why are we, it creates more frustration.
Yeah, I appreciated your answer. I guess where I was going, one of my concerns, and I'll say it to you because you're seated there, are we creating just level 2 projects in the downtown, people staying away from this particular setting?
Can you ask that again?
We're seeing 12-story and less buildings being built in the downtown. I'd like to see taller buildings.
Oh.
So in order to keep from having to go before the political body, it seems that we're putting everybody in front of you. That was where I was headed.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that because those haven't come before us, and if they're not coming before us and that is an option, there's probably a reason why we're not seeing those. So your gut check may be right, but I don't have an experience to relate that directly back to.
Questions? Cecil?
Going to that, the recent Kenilworth decision, one of the decisions made was to allow variance in the road widths to a narrower width. And I heard that at least some maybe it was from the staff advocacy, I wasn't at the meeting, but was to make the project work, they needed the variance. How do you come to terms with that argument?
So the road width, so with that project, it's kind of on almost a kind of an L triangle. There was an existing plat of this road could have come here. That creek is kind of down in the bank coming down this way, and the developer wanted to move that road up here. If we had said no to that subdivision modification, then the developer could have chosen to come down to this road that was on the bottom. So he actually could have developed more units on that parcel than what he will develop with that subdivision modification that we approved. For me, that one came down to, there were kind of two trains of thought on the board. One was Commissioner Minicozzi voted no against that because he felt like the developer should go back to the original plat for connectivity, and that was his reason for saying no to that. Based on what we understand, or how I interpreted the information that was shared with me, is that moving that road up here actually created less land disturbance than the existing plat. So that was what kicked me over to saying yes to that. Otherwise, I probably would have been with Mr. Minicozzi and saying the connectivity is the way. And that area is really sensitive from a runoff standpoint, and I had a hard time with that one.
And it's a little confusing because the road's not there. There's no road there right now. It only exists on paper. Right. It's only platted. So you were changing the plat. Well, and where the eventual road would appear.
But I mean, even if we had said no, all of that stuff could have gone in there with more units. So it was more of a, I think this, where I get into struggles with P&Z is when there's a right and a right, and which one is more right, or which sometimes there's a wrong and a wrong, which one is less wrong.
Well, and you know, that's an interesting issue because Gwen and I met today with some of the Kenilworth residents along with our city attorney and our city manager, and I feel a little bit guilty of sending mixed messages. I mean, we up here have said very clearly that we're supportive of affordable housing and urban infill, and we are examining ways to promote that even further. So I think that, you know, you all have heard that message loud and clear. So I worry about, you know, doing an infill project in the Kenilworth neighborhood has really stirred up some concern from the neighbors, and I worry about how to walk that balance between continuing with these policies that encourage urban infill. And it looked to me like those homes, those single-family homes, would probably be in the less expensive range, which is what we need more of. You know, but balance that with the concerns of the residents who want an opportunity to you know, some of them may even want to block it all together, but some of them may want to you know, something less of blocking it, but get involved in all these different aspects that you all are looking at. You know, you're really looking at a subdivision application.
Right. Yeah, and so there are two things about that. One is that the reason I started to go down that path with Councilman Davis is that was, again, to say no, I needed a technical reason to say no. The other part about that, and where did that thought go? I'll come back to it, I hope. Well, there were two things you mentioned. That was the
balancing our mixed messaging.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I lost it. Oh, I know what it is. One of the things that from a policy decision, from a policy standpoint, that I would like to see is, rather than that voluntary neighborhood meeting, is some threshold for a mandatory meeting. Now, the developer in that case, I had talks with the neighborhood folks, and they said the developer wouldn't meet with them as a group. He was good about meeting with them individually, but they don't have to do that, and that has caused problems. So I think as we do infill, which is great and wonderful, it does create more tension. Should there be a required developer meeting?
One of the suggestions, the Kenilworth project, I mean, I'm focusing on, I guess we're in that.
We're in it.
One of the things that the residents seem to be saying is they were troubled by the notice, or the fact that they didn't get enough notice. And one of the suggestions was to maybe notice the, you know, same group of people, but notice it before the technical review. What do you think of that? I mean, the mayor and I were...
I don't, in my experience with other communities in this issue, and Asheville included, is I think that, you know, did the city follow the law? Yes. Did they do what they required? Yes. Are there minimum statutes? Yes. To go back to my experience, when somebody doesn't like a project, no amount of process on the front end is going to save it. So could there be more notice? Yeah. But if they don't like the outcome of that, are they going to ask for even more notice? So maybe we don't have the right balance. Maybe that's something that can be looked at. But in my experience, the city is pretty good about, or the staff are pretty good about following what they're legally required to do, and that would have to go back to council. You know, I think maybe because I'm in the planning world, I think it's probably adequate notice.
Well, and that's important to note. You do help advise other communities when they're drafting their ordinances. And on this one, it's my understanding there's no state requirement for notice on a subdivision application, but that the city, does have a notice requirement in the UDO for a subdivision application.
Right.
Okay.
Any follow-up? Cecil?
In your application 3 years ago, you talked about struggling with, often in the plan, the 2025 plan, you could find as much reason to say yes as to say no, that it offered sort of competing requirements or Do you think that P&Z can offer us some suggestions about ways to strengthen that or tighten it up?
Yeah. Or I think I can. I don't want to speak for all of P&Z. And to be clear, that was from my application from this year, because 3 years ago I wouldn't have had that intimate knowledge. My cover pages were from 3 years ago. My actual answers were from this year.
Oh, this is the more recent. Okay, that
yeah,
makes sense
yeah.
to me. Okay, I thought when it said on my note here that it was 20, I thought, okay.
Yeah, no, those are current.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so yes, and I think if you remember, gosh, I'm not sure when we did it now, maybe back last fall, Mayor Manhammer, Rose, right before you became mayor, you were in our last P&Z retreat with us where we went through a process and kind of looked at some of what we've been terming hot spots and kind of just pinpointing some things in the comprehensive plan that need to be looked at. So we've done some of that work, and we're looking forward to the retreat that we have scheduled, I think, in December, to talk through those a little bit more. I think there are definitely some of us on the commission that have some thoughts, lots of thoughts, probably more than you want about that. So.
Right, thank you.
Christy, I have a question. You and Commissioner Minicozy did some research regarding comprehensive plan, UDO, some zone classifications that might be improved in certain geographies and so on. And I've looked at that, and I really appreciate that. There's a lot of talk here about embarking on a process to update the comprehensive plan and perhaps follow that with some modifications to the UDO. Mm-hmm. A lot of talk about simplification of the UDO, but also moving toward more compact development patterns and density, and so the changes might end up being significant if we go down this path. Could you talk a little bit about where you would want that to go, you know, in your view from a planning standpoint? And then secondly, what would you like to see as a process between the Planning and Zoning Commission and the council as we look down that road together?
That's a good question. Well, let me say one thing before I answer that question. In the work that we did, I think one of the hard things is that if you were to ask, if I were standing in front of you consulting in front of a local government, one of the things that I would say is that you have some danger spots in the city in terms of zoning. And the one that I keep using as an example is the Steinmart. That's highway business. I mean, this is a neighborhood that most of you live close to. And
so we've been told.
Yeah. And so it's highway business, and that is just not the right zoning district for that piece of property. You know, there's no buffer between that property and the neighborhood surrounding it. I would not want to be a council member when that one came in front of me. So the first level of that is looking at some of those things that are just, even where we go in the future, is looking at some of those that just really aren't appropriate. We dealt with that at the last meeting where they tore down the Howard Johnson and are building a new hotel. You know, highway business development standards, neighborhood right here, no transition zone in between. So that's kind of the first level. But to go to the second part of the question, and how do we go toward more compact development? You know, I don't think we need to rework the whole comprehensive plan. As I said in my answers, you know, we could go through a whole nother process, and our values probably aren't going to change that much. It's the tools that we have available to meet today's development patterns, and I don't think our tools are in line with our values. So looking at kind of, you know, thinking about a comprehensive planning process or an update or whatever it is that we call it, doing that with lots of community dialogue, which can be hard and painful and can take a long time, but doing it with the end goal of what are the right tools for the right areas in our city. Haywood Road and the form-based code in downtown with the downtown master plan, you know, those are two areas that have special standards to kind of meet what they need and what they are and what the neighborhood has wanted them to become. So I'd like to see that duplicated. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Great. 3 minutes left, a little less. Councilman Smith.
The question I'd intended to ask has kind of been covered, Christy, between your answers here and what you've been able to tell other folks. And so I just kind of wanted to make a comment and hear your reflection on it. I think one of the terms that we use at this dais for shorthand is neighborhoods and how neighborhoods feel about things. and too often I think what we're talking about is some North Asheville neighborhoods and some specific neighborhoods, and it's actually a shorthand for some neighborhoods. Because I know that some places in South Asheville and in West Asheville are absorbing this density and doing it without marshaling a lot of, or organizing against necessarily some of that density and infill. And I'm just wondering what you've observed.
I think you're exactly right about that. I think there's a high, in West Asheville, I think there's just a higher tolerance for that. I'm curious about whether we'll hit a point, and I say we as a neighborhood, a neighbor of that resident, of that neighborhood, will we hit a point where we decide it's too much and then we start getting upset? But there are certainly neighborhoods in our community that have things happening and going in and have things happening around them that will eventually affect them, that have less of a voice. They don't have the organizing power. This is not totally related, but we were on the multimodal commission. We were talking about how to prioritize sidewalks, and one of the things I said there is I don't want a neighborhood that can come to the table with resources to get a certain amount of priority above a neighborhood that can't do that, doesn't have the resources, they don't have the organizing capacity. It's just not fair. So that's not the exact thing, but I think that's what I think about when there's just some inequality. And the magic bullet or the magic shotgun shell for that, I don't know what it is, because that's a perennial neighborhood development issue. Somebody called it silver buckshot instead of silver bullet. So that's what we need, silver buckshot.
Well, we're just about to the end of the time limit here. Any last quick comments or very quick questions? Great. Thank you so much for your
Thanks for your
service
service.
and
Thanks,
applying.
Christy.